choices shape the market, our society, and our quality of life. That's why Euroconsumers helps millions of people in their daily choices, providing simple solutions to complex problems. Euroconsumers is a cluster of organizations, a network of people, a group established to protect consumer rights and well-being that brings consumers and companies together in transparent relationships of trust that respect their independence. Our deep understanding of products and consumption gives consumers a credible, expert voice worldwide. We bridge the gap between buyers and manufacturers, between supply and demand. And in this digital age, we create opportunities for all parties to come together in constructive dialogue, partnering to build a future of better products and services. Euroconsumers has the power of a global group that believes humanity can develop, grow, and change for the better, and that we can promote this by uniting millions of consumers in strength and speaking responsibly for them, while simultaneously engaging in relationships of trust with responsible, sustainable companies.
Hello and welcome to the Hunger Games, our food prices being played. Hello to everyone who's watching Start Talking Live and those of you who are watching or listening to a recording. Euroconsumers will be live tweeting throughout the webinar, and if you want to join in, you can use the hashtag #StartTalking. And you can also follow the account at Euroconsumers on Twitter and LinkedIn. If you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn, you can also share the broadcast. So we're going to be talking about food prices today. Latest figures show that food price inflation in the Eurozone is 13.6%, which defies the overall drop in inflation to about 7%, according to the latest figures. So we're going to be considering why this is the case. Food prices, of course, have been actually rising steadily since mid-2021 and accelerated with the war in Ukraine when that broke loose, and the energy prices and other things subsequently spiked. But a recent Euroconsumers survey showed that a quarter of consumers are now buying less food due to the price spikes, and 41% of them say that they don't have any margins left to cover any future increases. And that's because of the pressures from all sorts of other pricing as well. So many more consumers are probably wondering whether prices will ever come down. And there's a bigger question here. If they do come down, how long will it be before there's another shock that shakes the food system? So this month in Start Talking, we're going to take a deeper look at the food system and how prices work within that. And we're going to be trying to look at what's causing the surge in prices and also what the future holds, not just for food prices, but for the security and sustainability of our whole food system. So we're here to explore, to take a look together at what's going on. And this afternoon, we'll be joined by 5 people, each of whom have a different perspective on the current food system, and be really interested to hear those. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Augustin Reyna, who's the Director of Legal and Economic Affairs at BEIC. BEIC is the umbrella group for 46 consumer organisations across Europe. They represent and they defend the interests of European consumers across a huge range of markets, including food, but also things like digital, health, trade, pretty much any consumer market where consumers are affected, BEIC are there. Next, we have Amaury Geyseling, who works on food sovereignty at CNCD 111111. They are a membership organisation based in Belgium. Their members include around 70 NGOs who work on issues like development, trade, social justice and labour. And they include several international NGOs you would have heard of, like Greenpeace, Amnesty International and Oxfam. So welcome, Amaury. Next, we have Francesco Tremontin, who works for Ferrero. Ferrero started as an Italian family confectionery firm and is now an international company behind brands like Nutella, Tic Tac, Kinder, and of course, my favorite, Ferrero Rocher chocolate. So welcome, Francesco. Thanks very much for joining us. Next, we have Vincent Collott, who is a senior financial analyst at Euroconsumers. He works in a team that looks at financial products and gives advice and analysis. And he joins us in his capacity as a financial analyst. He's not representing Euroconsumers' positioning on inflation, but he's here to give his take on what's going on in the markets. And our final guest today is Anton Delbar. He's the chief economist of Eurocommerce, who are the European sector organisation for wholesale and retail companies of all different shapes and sizes. He's previously worked as the chief economist at Comeas, the Belgian Federation, and before that had a career in internal policy think tank of the Belgian Green Party. So we've got a fantastic range of people with us today. So welcome everybody. So we're going to jump straight into what is actually going on with food prices. But before I speak to our guests today, let's find out what consumers think of the food price rises and how they're experiencing them now.
It's probably something like a takeaway coffee or something like this.
So luxury products is chocolate, cheese, wine, coffee.
If you want to choose the meats that are not very expensive, now it's still expensive.
For cucumbers, they were like immensely expensive, or a pepper. Yeah, those were the two. I was like, what the?
I saw 10 euro the kilos, or it was 5 or 6 euro the kilo, and now it's 10 or 11, and I think it's double the price, and for me it's not possible.
Beer, of course, that's always the one.
So beer and cucumbers, coffees are on people's list, but of course there's other basic foodstuffs that are rising as well. So I'm going to ask Amaury now, can you give us your take on why prices are rising?
Okay, thank you, Liz. Yes, I will just give just a part of the answer because it's a broad, right question. But I will start with the most obvious element of the answer is Ukraine's war, because we know that it has a huge impact on the food price. And just to remember that the price of the wheat price, for example, has reached the highest level that we never knew before. Even the crisis in 2008, we didn't face such a food price inflation. So this is something very extraordinary that we are facing since Ukraine's war. And so to understand why this conflict has an impact on food price, we have to understand the place and the role that Ukraine and Russia are playing in the food system. They are really major cereal grains producer, but also major grains exporter. Even more than producer, they play a key role in the long value chains. Both countries are on the top 3 or the top 5 of all major grains stock. So we speak about wheat, maize, buckwheat, sunflower. And so this is one of the reasons, but it's just an element because in the reality and until now, it is true that there is a little bit less of production, we will say, in Ukraine and in Russia, less of distribution, so export. But in the reality, the problem in the production or in the distribution are lower that we could fear at the beginning of the war. So we find a solution to export the production from Ukraine. So there is the Black Sea Grain Initiatives, and there is also European corridor that allows Ukraine to export its production. And in terms of production, there was less production in Ukraine, that's true, but not so much. We speak about between 12 or 22% of less production in Ukraine. But the reality is that there is a lot of stock available. It's another big question because we don't have full transparency on the stock, but we cannot say that we do not have enough food to feed the world. There is enough food. We produce enough, even in 2022, in 2023 too, and also when we add to the production the stock that we have, there is enough food for everybody. So it's just part of the explanation to speak about the production and the distribution. So we'll add another element is the fertilizer price, and to understand why the fertilizer price also are rising, we have to understand that Ukraine and Russia are also playing a key role at the global level in producing fertilizer, and those prices were high because of the war itself, but also because of the gas, the soaring gas price. And those prices are rising even before Ukraine's war. And so you understand the logic. If the gas prices are high, the fertilizer price are high, and then the food price are also rising. But let me end maybe this first part of the answer by flagging the fact that it's the food price are not high just because of Ukraine's war. We are facing a food price crisis, I would say, since 2019 at least, we can say, because since 2019 the food price are going high and high, and we can think about the COVID crisis that play a role in 2020, but as I'm saying, it started before even the COVID crisis. So it's linked to the gas prices and also other crises such as the climate crisis, which is also playing a role in the food system and jeopardizing production at the global level. So yes, I will just leave it here for the moment, and I'm happy to complete a little bit later.
Okay, thank you. So this is a crisis that's been brewing for a while, it sounds. So we can't just blame COVID or the war in Ukraine. There are other factors, and I think we'll be looking at those later. So there's lots of different parts that make up the food chain. We've heard there about machinery, fertilizers, as well as the farmers, and then the retailers, obviously. So we're going to just play another short video where we asked consumers what they thought might be causing the food prices. So let's see what their view is on that.
I think it's partly of the water shortage in Spain or the Ukraine war.
Corporates, they're just trying to get more money.
Well, I think the people between. So you have a farmer who produces milk, and I don't know how much people pass in between who take from it. He gets 20 cents and I pay €5, and who got rich from it? I mean,
the pandemic obviously affected all of us, and it influenced the how food was being produced and how the economies were doing.
Even if our salary are higher than before, it still isn't enough.
It kind of sucks for everyone involved, but yeah.
Okay, so some shared views there on the pandemic, the Ukraine, and also someone mentioning their lower spending power that consumers have, and other people within the food chain. So I thought that was really interesting. I'm going to come now to Francesco Tramontin, who's from Ferrero. I just want to stress that Francesco is not here to represent all producers and manufacturers. I think that would be impossible. It's such a huge sector. He's here to share this perspective as a producer. And with that in mind, could you talk us through the kind of factors that actually impact on your costs?
Yeah, and I'll build on a lot what Amaury said, and also some of the interviews. It's interesting. There's something I hear in our internal talks is high and sticking inflation, which is, I think, is a term that reflects well what the business perceives. And I'll just reflect on some elements. I mean, there's going to be an element of repetition, but what we hear internally is, the first point is actually economy is still expanding. And that drives price up, and this is not necessarily bad news, but de facto is an important element. There's increasing labor cost, which somehow is driven by many countries. Wages are increased to actually compensate workers for increased cost of living. Commodity prices are still well above 2020, even if they've been coming down a little bit now. And then this is something specific for us. For example, there's key ingredients and raw materials. A good example for us is cocoa, which is nevertheless on a very steep increasing trend, with actually deflation expectation very not likely to materialize anytime soon. So this is on the pure, let's say, sticky inflation part. Then there's the business uncertainty element. Obviously, the Russia-Ukraine war is part of it, but there's other elements like China, Taiwan. There's all the post-COVID that left supply chain in a constant state of tension, just because we show so much vulnerability when everything happened. Mm-hmm. So there's that element, and there's a third element which is more long-term, more chronic, but it's important to factor in. I'm sure we'll come back to that. Is that the cost of producing food is somehow slowly increasing, and that linked to higher food quality standard, higher sustainability standard, things of packaging regulation, things of supply chain regulation, which is inherently something good in many cases, but the factor they play in the way we run our businesses. So these are the various elements. And again, I go from the shorter term of inflation to some more structural geopolitical elements, which represents the world today, to long-term chronic elements that affects the way and the cost of producing food.
Thanks, Francesco. And I'm sure we'll certainly pick up on some of those long-term elements later in the discussion. I just want to turn now to Vincent. So, as I say, you're a financial analyst for Euroconsumers, and you've been looking across the board at firms producing food. What, as a stock analyst, what kind of things do you need to look at when you're considering the impact of production on price rises?
Of course, food giants like Nestlé, Unilever, Danone, Coca-Cola, B&Bev, and so on have to increase their prices while their input costs are also increasing. That's normal. But the first point to check for a financial analyst in this kind of situation is this. Do these firms have enough pricing power to do it so they can protect their operating margins without sacrificing too much of their volumes and thus too much of their market shares? That's the key point. And so far and globally, the answer to this question is yes, they have indeed that pricing power. For the first quarter of this year, we are talking about average price increases of between 10 and 15% at the world level. And globally again, at the world level, their operating margins have stabilized, not really increased, but stabilized, at least in their forecast for this year. And they have stabilized at the level of their pluriannual targets. Thus, it's difficult to tell if there is an exaggeration at the level of operating margin levels. But why is it so important for this firm to secure their profitability? That's really important for them. First, operating profit margin is an indicator for investors in evaluating the capacity of the firm in generating, at the end of the day, free cash flow. I don't know if you if you're okay with this kind of terms, operating margins and free cash flow. Operating margin is simply the profit before financial cost and taxes, and free cash flow is cash in when your consumers pay you, less cash out, your cost and your investment. And the free cash flow is necessary to pay dividend to shareholders. That's It's a point. But apart from this inflationary episode, these margins were already fragile before this episode, often 2 or 3% lower than pre-COVID. Because the groups have to invest in innovation, to invest in marketing, to adapt to the change in consumer tastes. Less junk food, more healthy product, more sustainable packaging, and so and so. And this volatility of consumer taste tends to accelerate, putting pressure, at least in the short term, on margins. And decreasing operating margins may mean less money for further innovation. It's important to understand that. And third reason why the operating margin is so important for them, €1 is €1, of course for consumers, but also for the firms. These groups try to anticipate the situation. They may fear the evolution of the economic situation. Is there a recession on the horizon, yes or no? They may fear the increase of their financial cost with the increase of interest rates, especially for the most indebted of them after some costly acquisition, and possibly they may fear the increase of their taxes as governments become a little bit short of money everywhere.
Okay, thank you. So again, we've got the theme coming through that there are factors which are outside of the immediate crisis that we're in now, which have been driving up prices for a while now, and not just very recently. Anton, I want to come to you now. You're representing retailers. So obviously, when consumers are handing over their cash, they're feeling the impact firsthand, and that's at the shops and the groceries that you represent. So from your point of view, what's driving up the prices now?
Well, basically, if you look at what the main cost drivers are for the prices, it's actually the commodity prices and energy prices of 10 months ago. Why is that? That's because there's a time lag between commodity and energy prices and prices at retailer. Why is that? It's because first off, products need their time to work their way through the value chain. Secondly, retailers often work with contracts that cover several months, and they don't include real-time pricing. So that means that prices are fixed for a couple of months, and that has a delaying effect on the retail prices. So that means that if we saw the commodity and energy prices starting to come down in October last year, that means that you need to look 10, maybe 12 months later to see the food prices start coming down. So we expect food prices will increase until September because of what happened last year, but then we expect food inflation to come down. I'm also glad, and I won't repeat what the previous speakers said, but I completely agree with them. But to put things in perspective, while the margins at the producer level stayed around the same, we looked at a group of the large FMCG producers, they had margins of around 18-19%. If you look at the retailers, they have a different business model. So that means high volume, low margin. So retailers have margins of around 3%, 3.0 last year. And what we saw is that most retailers saw their margins come down because most consumers were going towards cheaper supermarket models. So that means that discounters have seen their volumes grow, and towards cheaper products. So that also means more private label products. And what we saw is that since the start of 2022, consumers have been spending less. And so volumes have been coming down in almost all the supermarkets, and as sector as a whole is currently in a crisis because volumes have been coming down since 2022, and the margins have also been under a lot of pressure, with most of them coming down.
Okay, so some of the research that we've seen, which says consumers are buying less and spending less, that you're seeing that directly
Yeah, it directly impacts our companies. We see that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Now, there's certainly suspicions around. We've heard this term greedflation. And obviously, at the moment, financial and monetary situation that lots of governments are in, it's tempting to throw blame in all sorts of different directions. Vincent, do you think it's happening, and if it is, how long do you think it will last? What's your take on whether greedflation is happening?
Yeah, maybe part of the problem when we talk about greedflation, part of this problem may be linked to one of the recent favorite strategies of the giant food firms and global brands. This strategy is premiumization or upselling, if you prefer. They sell you a more expensive version, just a premium version of a basic product, either thanks to input or ingredients of better quality, and either thanks to a better marketing or a mix of the two. And thus, when you, as a consumer, you buy a bottle of beer, a candy bar, or food for your dogs on the shelves of your supermarket, maybe you don't buy exactly the same product as 3 months before. Worse, maybe the previous basic product doesn't exist anymore. And if the new product is too expensive for you, then you have to buy a private label, maybe. Thus, more and more, progressively, the food giants choose their customers in the upper middle class. And if they prefer affluent customers because they are more profitable, that's it. What can we do? No. Is there greedflation in the commonly accepted meaning of that word? Maybe, but then in my opinion, it occurs only marginally and temporarily. Why marginally? Apart from premiumization, firms may indeed increase their price a little bit more than strictly necessary in order to protect their operating margins. I told you just a moment ago. But at this stage, we have no evidence, no proof of exaggeration or collusion between them. I think the main cause of inflation is monetary. We don't tell it up to now. There were massive injection of free money by central banks and governments, with an acceleration during the COVID crisis. In fact, inflation is the loss of value of the money. For instance, gold has increased by 500% in 20 years, with acceleration when there were massive money printing by central banks. And I think also greedflation could be temporary and not structurally. Why? A majority of economists think now that inflation will continue its recent drop, while the economic recovery momentum has recently slowed down in major countries like Germany, China, and maybe the United States. If this is the case in a free market, I hope we're still in a free market, competition rule will again put pressure on price, or at least on price increases. That will not mean we will come back easily to a level of 2% inflation. But if we have to check if it's a temporary phenomenon or not, I invite you in Q2 or Q3 when the firm will publish their quarterly numbers, and we will see.
Okay, so we'll wait and see. Vincent mentioned collusion there, and actually I wanted to bring Augustin in here because this concept of greedflation, it could be seen as a very classic competition problem. So large firms taking advantage of the market conditions to profit. You're obviously an expert in consumer issues across lots of different markets. Do you think we're seeing anti-competitive practice here?
Hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Perhaps one step back. When we talk about, of course, price formation is a extremely complex issue. There are many factors, and I think several of them have been addressed. There are, of course, behavioral factors as well. We cannot underestimate the fact that there is an expectation that prices are going up. And that's an expectation actually that can be also used in the benefit of the providers, because when people go to the supermarket, they know that it's going to be expensive. How much? Well, we don't know. It depends on the day to day, and that, of course, is a behavioral aspect that needs to be taken into account. It was mentioned, for example, the case of private labels. People turning to private labels. Well, really interesting. If you look at different practices across member states, in Portugal, one of our members, DECO, identify actually that the increases in private label products was much higher in comparison to branded counterparts, up to 100%, but they should be cheaper. So the question is that it doesn't seem as simple and as mathematical as we might think of. In Spain, the government intervened to reduce VAT on basic products, but still prices continue going up. We have the other side of the inflation, which is the shrinkflation, the fact that then volumes become reduced, but not the prices. And of course, in this scenario, that also means that for consumers become more difficult to identify what are the most appropriate offers and deal for them. It becomes even more complex also to compare prices. And to have a parameter that allows you to differentiate, between the different products, different brands, so on and so forth. For example, in Germany, it has identified as problematic, the comparison of prices, because many providers did not basically respect the union cost references. So again, it becomes much more difficult for consumers to compare. And of course, there is also opinions out there. We need to see also the prospect evolution in the coming months. That inflation is not primarily cost driven, but also profit driven, and that, of course, that means that higher costs are passed on to consumers. And one of the factors that plays a role here is also market concentration. And for example, if you look at the agri-food sector, there was a very interesting article, an investigative piece of The Guardian, where it showed that 4 giant agribusiness corporations have increased their profits compared to pre-pandemic levels, to 255%, which that to me sounds quite gross or quite significant. So, of course, I think that we need to look at the whole picture. The fact that we are seeing this problem has to do also with the levels, as I said before, of market concentration. That doesn't mean that there might not be also anti-competitive practice in place. It's very difficult to detect whether there are collusion or cartels taking place, because also of this expectation that prices will go up. And in an inflationary scenario, collusion practices are actually facilitated because there is this expectation. So that also means that authorities need to be even more vigilant than ever. So, for example, the Portuguese Competition Authority, they opened several different cases, and as well, there are concerns about the use of resale price maintenance in order to keep prices at a certain level. And of course, I think that looking at the medium long term, we would need to think as well of what are the necessary interventions that might be needed. For example, now under competition law, you can intervene in markets if you have anti-competitive agreements or abuse of dominant position. But there might be systemic problems that do not fit in one or the other category, but still authorities do not have the tools to intervene. In some countries, at national level, there exists what we call this market investigation. So you can go into the market, look what is happening, asking companies, please explain me the price formations or what are, maybe there are some indications that things are not going as they should. And that enables the agencies to get a clearer picture and identify what are the appropriate remedies that can be implemented. This was tried at European level. proposal recently, but at the end the Commission decided not to propose what we call a new competition tool. But indeed, we think there is something that very much needed, because at the end of the day, if you see that the problem is there, but then you cannot intervene, then what is the solution?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I think when you were talking about the difficulties in comparing prices and being a sort of empowered shopper, I also thought in the UK we're seeing lots of supermarkets offering much lower prices for people who are part of their loyalty data schemes, and I don't know whether that's something that's happening more broadly, but again, we're bringing in the digital data element as well, and so that makes it difficult to actually find a standard price to compare. It does feel like consumers the tools that they've used to shop smartly are becoming a bit blunt, so that's tricky. So another suspect who's come under scrutiny are the hedge funds and speculators. Now, again, these are kind of maybe not people that a consumer noticing a food price going up would necessarily know much about. But Olivier De Schutter, who's co-chair of an international panel of experts on sustainable food systems, says he's accused hedge funds of making obscene profits by betting on hunger and exacerbating it. Now, this seems shocking if it is happening. Anne-Marie, can you tell us a bit more about how speculation works in commodity markets like food, if you think it's happening, and if it is, what can we do about it? Sorry, you're just muted.
Sorry.
But
to make it clear to the people listening, food speculation, it's really a complex topic. Even people like me, we are supposed to follow the topic. It takes a lot of time to understand. And so we are at the moment with Oxfam, Foodwatch, etc. We are ordering a new study on the topic. There is big debate, but one of the challenge when we speak about speculation, and it's one of the problem, and then also one of the recommendation, is that there is a lack of transparency on the market. And so to explain who is playing a role in speculation, how much they profits and they took advantage of the market, it's sometimes difficult because of lack of information. And let me also explain that it's complex because there is some actors that are in between. So it's a connection with what we were speaking about greedflation, because in the grain sector, the big four, so the A, B, C, D, because it's the abbreviation of the acronym of the big companies. So Cargill is the most famous one. We know that. I didn't speak about the hunger data, but we know that more and more people are suffering hunger in the world. This is why we speak about the food crisis. And at the same time, the profits of those companies are really exploding. And when I say that, it's for Cargill or for ADM, which is one of the fourth. They are facing the best sales and the best benefits from their history right now. So this is happening, and definitely there is nothing that can explain the fact that they made so much benefits except speculation. And because speculation, it starts with the prediction. And so there was a fear when the Ukraine war started, there was a fear that we will have not enough food to feed the world. And so because we need, as it has been explained before, we need to, in this, the food system, the actors will buy in advance via food commodities future market. They have to buy in advance, and they will buy at higher price because there is the fear that we won't have enough food. And the big four, the ABCD, they play a role in that fear. They benefit from it because they could have give assurance and make the fear down, because they have a better view on the private stock because they manage private stock of grain. And they could have say, don't worry, even if there is shortage in production and distribution, we have enough in our stock. But they haven't done that. And so they took advantage of the uncertainties in the market. And so it's a form of speculation. But beside that, because they are legitimate actor in the food commodity markets, but what we are also denunciating is the fact that there is non-food related actors that are that jump in the food commodities future market, and we are speaking about hedge funds. They don't used to play a role in the food market, and since the beginning of Ukraine's war, they knew, because it happened in the past with 2008, 2011, that the price will go high, and they can bet on that, and so they will buy in advance, and they will play a role, and they will buy grain in advance. Then the food price are going high, but there is I don't know in English, it's the self-prophecy, the prophecy. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So we know the concept for long, but it's still happening. So they bet on the price, and that at the end they will earn a lot of money. And so there is because I don't have a lot of time, but if people want to dig a little bit, they can check the Lighthouse report. They made in fact two report, a report last year, and they just made a new report, Lighthouse reports, and they show how much benefits. I think it's $1.9 billion benefits that has been done by hedge funds since the beginning of Ukraine's war. And so this is why on the topic there is solution. We know the solution. We need a better regulation on those markets. And what do we mean by better regulation? It's first, we need more transparency. We need to know who is buying and selling, and we need to put some limit. We are speaking about position limit. We need to put limits for some actors and say that they cannot buy as much as they want. So it's some of the elements, and another element, maybe I can get back on that a little bit later, but it's the problem that the food stock now are really in the hand of the big companies, so it's private stock, and we need to get back on something that has been done in the past. We need public stock. We need the states in Europe, in the global south also, to have public stock of grain. So when there is shock such as COVID or Ukraine's war, we know that we have enough food for the year coming, and we don't depend on the lack of information. We don't depend on those big companies.
Yeah, so it's a chance. I mean, it's obviously not great if people are trading and speculating on a basic food stuff, but it's a chance to know and anticipate that and change it for the future. Gosh, the time's gone really quickly. So we're on to actually the last section now, where I'm going to ask, is our food system actually broken? And if it is, do we need to fix it? And we're going to go back to a final clip from the consumers we spoke to, and we asked them whether they thought the food price rises were temporary or a longer term problem.
I don't think that the prices are going to be lower in the future. I think it's gonna stay like this.
It seems like more of a long-term problem. I guess that you have the environmental issues and population as well as trade. I think historically people have paid a lot more for food, so potentially that's something that we need to get back used to again.
Not really, but I did hear that they were trying to make a few improvements.
I hope that there will be improvement, especially when the season of cucumbers is, we don't have to import them from Spain or other countries.
I have a lot of optimism in humanity, and I'm sure we will rise to the challenge of sustainability, the environment, being fair to one another, and getting more equality both within our more Western countries and with those people who are producing food and needing food in other countries too.
So I thought that was really interesting, and someone picked up the point then that perhaps we just have to get used to there paying more or a bigger proportion of our budgets for food if we want it to be the quality and sustainable that we want. So let's talk about this a bit. Anton, again, what do you think could change with the system now? How could retailers help make food more affordable for people and sustainable for the planet in the longer term?
I think making it affordable means that people need to have enough purchasing power. So that's not something retailers can do, of course. That's something that's up to governments to have solid policies to protect the purchasing power of consumers, citizens. But there are other things. When it comes to sustainability, it's important for us to keep on innovating. But that's difficult because margins have gone down, turnover has gone down. And it means that we to achieve the goals and ambitions we have as a sector to fully follow the ambitions of decarbonization and more sustainable food production and use, we need to double our investment rate. So I think that the correct policies at the national and the EU level will be important to support that. Also, more than 90% of the carbon emissions happen in other parts of the value chain. So that means that we need to be able to work together with those other parts of the value chain to have a more integrated, sustainable system of food production. Also, some of the issues that have been addressed with large companies and with speculation is that those are market failures. And when it comes to market failures, we need to look at market regulation and enforcement. This year we celebrate 30 years of the European single market. We need more single market. We see that in the past few years, the number of infringement procedures at the European level has been steadily declining. There has been less and less enforcement, while we need more enforcement, certainly against certain of the monopolistic players in certain key sectors. So I think if we want sustainable products, innovation and collaboration will be important. And if we want to keep prices down, we really need to address market failures and certain types of monopolistic or quasi-monopolistic behaviors by the stronger companies, like, for instance, market segmentation, where they say, okay, you cannot buy from any country you want as a retailer. We will decide in what country you will source your product, which leads to some products just being more expensive in some countries than others without a clear reason apart from the power of the producer selling that product.
Okay, thank you. So we need more single market in Europe. Francesco, as your perspective as a company that sources ingredients and works across the globe, what do you think can be done to improve food security and sustainability at the same time? How can we do that?
Yeah, there's three things on top of my mind and things that relates to what has been said here. So the first of all, we tend to treat into this conversation food as being all the same. We need to be aware we talk about very different categories. If you sell vegetables, if you sell chocolate, is a totally different thing, and that plays into the type of solutions that you put into place, and also the value distribution. So let's not forget, food is complex and there's a lot of elements into it. The second part, which is linked to that and linked to what all the previous speakers have said, it is about transparency. There's need of transparency. Sometimes transparency is driven by supply chain action, and more transparency is driven by regulation. I think, Anton, is what you were saying before. We'll all have different views about where transparency need more or need less, but the reality is that we do need the transparency to be able to evaluate how value is distributed. And the third is something that Anton also said, is we need to innovate in the way we establish business relationship. Otherwise, what happens, there's always going to be a winner and a loser. I mean, we know it. I mean, we buy cocoa as a core ingredient. We know very well that value distribution is not working in cocoa because we rely on many smallholder countries into African countries, many smallholder farmers into African countries. Now, solutions at that level will be mostly policy driven, but can be facilitated by companies. If you buy sugar, let's say in Italy, it's about contracting long terms and helping our suppliers to take different shock from world markets, for example. It's very different, but this element of transparency and finding new way of doing business are the key elements that we need to bring forward.
Thank you very much, Francesco. I'm going to bring Augustin in, because in this, we talked about there needs to be change and innovation, and there are some reforms being introduced at the EU now as part of the latest CAP reforms, so the Common Agricultural Policy, and they're designed to improve, or intended to improve, sustainability standards. in agribusiness. Can you just talk briefly about the changes and whether you think it's going to have the intended effect?
Yeah, sure. So in the last CAP reform, there was introduced an exclusion from competition law control of what we call sustainability standard agreements, being vertical or horizontal. That means that, for example, the agri-food sector could agree on higher standards and therefore not be subject to the control of competition law, in particular the rules on cartels. So it sounds like a promising initiative, but we as consumer organizations are extremely worried about that. There is no doubt whatsoever that we need to change the way we produce and we consume. The question is, should we leave this in the hands of private profit-making entities? We don't think so. Competition law has been designed basically to protect ultimately consumers against unjustified price increases resulting, for example, by cartels or anti-competitive agreements. Now, for the purpose of these sustainability standard agreements, competition law will not apply. That means that competition authorities and the European Commission won't be able to protect consumers in these cases. And the question is whether this mechanism that has just been adopted without an impact assessment, because that was done a type of last-minute deal during the CAP reform, would effectively lead to increasing sustainability standards, or could be used as a way to increase prices without the corresponding efforts and cost, basically leading to greenwashing. And this is important because, as I said before, there is an expectation by consumers that prices will go up. But there is also willingness to pay by consumers for more sustainable products. So if you combine these two things, and on top of that you add an exemption to the application of anti-competitive agreements rules, I think that's a cocktail that we wouldn't like to take. So from that point of view, we hope that the agency will remain nevertheless very vigilant, although there is a fundamental question about how these provisions are going to enforce and who is going to be in charge of basically checking that these agreements are effectively increasing sustainability standards. So certainly a space to watch.
Okay, thank you. Anton, did you want to just come in on that as well?
Yes, I understand why there is some suspicion about the new regulation there. And I agree that it will be extremely important for the competition authorities to enforce the fact that they use that exemption isn't abused. And I completely agree with that. I also think it's no single solution will be without issues if you work towards sustainability and towards innovation. One of the big issues here is that it's extremely difficult for policymakers to spearhead innovation in sustainability because they don't have enough knowledge about how things work operationally. And we see that in a lot of regulation, that you have poorly designed regulation, not because of bad intent, but purely because there is not enough knowledge on how things work actually. So I think the best way to spearhead innovation is indeed by having a good working market with a competition authority that is proactive and really ensures and double checks that exemptions aren't being abused. But I think the only way to spearhead the innovation will be if it's spearheaded by the companies that actually have to implement it and collaborate with their value chain, because otherwise you'll never get there, and certainly not quick enough.
Okay, fair point. So we talked about the role of the competition authorities. We've also got other intergovernmental systems which are influencing, possibly negatively influencing the system. So Amaury, do you want to come in on that? Because you feel some of them are not helping, to put it mildly.
Yeah, but I will just continue what has been said, and I just want to answer your question. Is the food system broken? For me, the answer is definitely yes. Okay. The food system is responsible for 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emission, and it's the sector that is not succeeding in decreasing its emission. compared to other sectors. Even the last cap, we were supposedly more green. Even the EU says that it has no impact on the climate issue. So let's see with the new cap. We have enough to feed 12 billion people, and nevertheless we have almost 1 billion people suffering from hunger. How is it possible? We have a system that depends on long value chain, and we see with crises such as COVID or Ukraine's war that food security depending on long value chain and hyper-specialization is not working anymore. It has worked for years, but now there is a problem. And also it's a system who depends on cheap energy price. And because of we don't have as much oil as 50 years ago. So this problem will definitely go on and on. We have a system where you have big corporations making huge profits, and at the same time, you have people suffering from hunger, but you have also the farmers. In the EU, the wage of the farmers is like 60% of the median salary. So definitely there is a problem, and we don't need small changes.
Right.
I agree that we need innovation, but I would say that we need deep change in the food system, and so we need another CAP, so the Common Agricultural Policy, and for those who are not familiar. But to change the CAP, we also need to change the WTO, the World Trade Organization, because it imposes some rules at the international level that we have to tackle now. So it was the logic of free market and non-intervention of the public sector, but we need intervention. We need the states and the Europe to finance the transition and to support the farmers in the transition. And so we need radical changes in those big I would say big institutions at the EU level, the WTO, to really have a change in the food system. And also in the company, we have spoken about the I don't know how you say that in English, but the super profits. There was a debate at the EU level for the super profits in the energy sector, but we could do the same in the food sector, because for the moment we have a lack of money to finance the transition, and we will need like a Marshall Plan to do that transition. So let's have the money where there is some money. So maybe extraordinary tax on those.
So the windfall tax, I think. So you think you think the system's broken, but it sounds like you have some
solution exists
for how it will how it can be fixed. Right, we've got a few minutes left, and we're coming towards the last question. So I want to ask all of you just to answer this in under a minute. Anton, when a food price is going to start to come down?
My best guess, as an estimate, my best guess is probably around September. We'll reach the peak, but it also will depend from country to country and on second round effects, like for instance, because food production and retail is labor intensive, if wage costs go up, that has an inflationary effect. It's a good inflationary effect because purchasing power is important, and it doesn't feed completely through to the pricing, but that can affect pricing. So it can differ a bit from country to country depending on the situation, but I think on average for the EU, it'll probably be around September.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. It's brave of you to make the prediction. Vincent, I want to ask you, what do you think could help improve the situation now in terms of pricing or in terms of the general economics of the situation?
Well, we are in a very difficult situation because you have inflation, and maybe lower the inflation from 10 to 5% is relatively easy, but reducing the inflation from 5 to 2 will be more difficult, I think. And thus you have a threat of inflation, and we have a threat of recession.
Right.
Because the governments cannot stand anymore the interest rate increase, and thus the monetary policy cannot kill the inflation. But not doing it, avoiding doing it, you run the risk of recession. Thus, I'm a little bit pessimistic in the short term.
Okay, thank you very much. Francesco, what change would you like to make to improve the food system in the future?
As I said before, I think we need to invest in more transparency. That means many things, and regulation will help. I mean, to me, some of the ingredients we buy, like cocoa, like some vegetable oils, like hazelnuts, that's where inequalities are there. So this is what I would want to see change. This is where I think companies like mine can play a role. The rest I leave it to better policies that have been suggested by others.
Thank you very much. I'm interested in what we can do as consumers. So, Augustin, what advice would you give to a consumer who want to influence the food system so that it's more sustainable without breaking their budgets?
Well, in reality, consumers, of course, can do a lot through their choices and purchasing decisions. Consumers organizations have been doing actually quite a lot to help consumers in the crisis. Advising them not only in the food sector, but also regarding energy, trying to help them to compare products and services, even shopping baskets. Our members have been championing in comparing the best offers that different retailers provide. Sometimes retailers are not so happy by this comparison, but this is how a market economy works. So certainly consumers organizations can do, and are doing a lot. Of course, it doesn't mean that state and public intervention is not needed. We need to have also the right and appropriate incentives, not only for consumers but also for the companies. And in that regard, there was this point by Vincent, what we should pick, a long-term recession or short-term inflation, which is of course two very, very bad things. But the reality is that we need to focus on the short terms in those policies that can help to alleviate the burden of those most vulnerable households. And then on the other side, ensuring that markets remain competitive, helping consumers to vote with their feet. And I think through competition, we'll be able to also achieve a lot and try to control prices, even if it's not at the level pre-COVID, because there are many different factors that are clearly affecting price formation. But at least we can start with that for a short term, and then in the longer term, I think that we can learn a lot through this crisis to see whether authorities and competent bodies have the right actually powers to do the interventions that are needed for future crises.
Thank you very much. And yes, I agree. We feel like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment, but lots that can be done. So thanks you to all of the participants, to Augustin, Anton, Francesco, Vincent, Anne-Marie, and everybody for discussing and taking part so well today. Thanks everyone who's been listening, following. We hope you've enjoyed it, and to everyone who's watching the recording, I hope you've got some value from this and learned a bit more about food pricing. And Start Talking happens every month. We've covered the metaverse, crypto, net neutrality, ChatGPT. Next month will be on June the 22nd. We'll be talking about digital product passports and whether they can help build a more clean, green, circular economy. And you can stay up to date with Euroconsumers on Twitter and LinkedIn. So that's everything for this month's Start Talking. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days, and thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Power to the people. Someone used to sing. And while singing is not our expertise, empowering people, empowering you is what we do. And in tune. How? We test, analyze, and compare products and services to ensure that they meet what you are looking for and comply with the law. We inform, advise, support, and represent consumers, and we do this in chorus, which is to say in several countries at the same time. Belgium, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Brazil. Then we dialogue, collaborate, and sue companies if needed to make sure people's and your needs are in the best hands. And in the end, we improve the market and we all win. Maybe it does deserve a song. What do you think? Euro Consumers. Empower people, improve the market.